Hello, and thank you for joining us for the penultimate session on this stage today. Do remember that any sessions that you've missed will be available on demand after the event and until the end of the year. This session is brought to you in partnership with Domain7 Solutions and is called The Future of Graduate Employability. How can leaders help develop the workforce of tomorrow? Please post your questions for the panel in the chat. And now I'm delighted to hand over to my colleague, Alistair Lawrence, who's the Special Projects Editor at THE, who will introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Hello, everyone. My name is Alistair Lawrence, and I'm the Special Projects Editor at Times Higher Education. Thank you for joining us for The Future of Graduate Employability. How can leaders help develop the workforce of tomorrow? Which is a panel discussion about one of the key considerations of the university's ongoing transformation. I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of 3 experts from academia and industry, who are Andy Cook, Vice-Chancellor and Chief Executive of Ravensbourne University London, Cara Honey, Graduate Opportunities Coordinator at the University of Winchester, and John Faulkner, UK Managing Director of Domain7 Solutions, a group of change management specialists who work with universities to help them plan their next steps by focusing on their staff and students. When we talk about digital transformation, perhaps one of the things that gets missed is that the process is part of a much wider cultural change that's now required at many universities, all of whom have different levels of existing infrastructures to support their staff and students, particularly around the issue of graduate employability. Andy, I'd like to kick things off by coming to you, if I may, because Ravensbourne has a reputation for being very forward-thinking in regards to both its modes of education and the way in which it prepares graduates to join the workforce. I was wondering if you could tell us what the key issues have been for you since March, and what have you found particularly useful when addressing them?
Thank you, Alistair. Obviously, since March, this has been obviously a tremendously important moment, I think, across the sector. And I think, as far as Ravensbourne is concerned, we absolutely recognise that this is an opportunity for us to embrace digital transformation and really try and pivot towards new audiences and new markets and new modes of working and delivery. I think what we're really focused on is positioning ourselves to reskill the people who have been unfortunate enough to lose their jobs as a result of the pandemic, who perhaps want to pivot towards technology or the creative industries, and developing modes of education and offers that will allow other groups to perhaps learn while they perhaps look after, with perhaps have family commitments, or even those people who are in part-time work that want to study.
Okay, thank you very much. And Cara, does that resonate with the processes that are ongoing at Winchester? I mean, what changes have you seen at your institution during this period?
I think one of the biggest changes that we've definitely experienced is moving to online, and we've tried to maintain some of our in-person teaching as well. So that's been a real kind of interesting challenge, I think, for staff and students alike, and especially in my role, which is focusing on trying to get students talking more with employers and starting to kind of understand the job market and learn about the graduate opportunities that are out there, working out how we deliver those kind of sessions and opportunities virtually while being aware that they're doing an awful lot of virtual activity at the same time. I think that's been a real kind of challenge.
Thank you. So, John, how does student employability fit into the wider change that Domain7 works with its university partners to implement? Because I'm aware that you take a very sort of big picture approach to this, and you consider things such as new models of leadership and management, and also the uncertainty that's facing both universities and students at the moment.
Thanks, Alistair. Yes, I mean, basically, whenever we work with any partner, we're trying to understand what are the holistic challenges that are facing them, but also, they're typically coming with a particular need or a new requirement or an opportunity. And what we try to do is make sure that we're truly understanding it from the people's point of view. We understand the organizational objectives, we understand the audiences or particular stakeholder groups that are seeking to be involved and supported. And then we try and understand what the technological challenges are there as well. having sort of achieved a certain level of understanding, it's then about saying, okay, what is a good experience going to be here? And it's invariably setting a vision for quite a few years hence, but it's a stepping stone advancement along the way. And sometimes there can be really quite simple, quick wins that be achieved. It just needs that collaboration, bringing together of the audiences of people involved to say, what is it that's going to make the world of difference to us at this point? From that, you can then start to develop a bit more intentional, longer term changes, which perhaps involve people and the capabilities and the teams, the structure of the organization, and the way it's devised to work alongside the communities involved. So yes, organizations typically in higher education are very much focused on, a lot of effort is focused on the attraction and enrollment of students at the beginning end. And there's a lot of commitment to helping them have a fantastic experience and obviously grow and develop their capabilities and learning during the time at university. There's perhaps a bit lesser focus of that end-to-end total experience all the way through, and reducing friction on the way, or identifying where greater opportunities are there to be leaned upon. And it might be down to organizational structures. It might be down to the way that the handshake between one particular department or another works. It might be that there's a clunky bit of technology in the way that just isn't working for people. We're obviously seeing in this last year, especially, a need to do things a bit more dynamically and digitally, which can obviously be immensely beneficial at this point of limited alternative routes. But on the other hand, there's always reason to be looking at how it might be done better to serve the people that are needing these outcomes. Okay,
thanks. I mean, what would you say the dangers are of not putting the people first in that process if you become too hung up on the systems rather than the staff and students who are going to be using them?
Yes, I mean, it's not uncommon that people see a technical solution somewhere and they think, oh, that's a great thing, we need that. And they can be good solutions, but they're not necessarily the right solution for the organization. There are many dynamics in play. What's the size of the team behind the scenes to be able to support? How mature are the processes? What are the actual specific needs or gaps in capability that need to be fulfilled? So yes, sometimes the new opportunity from a technological stance is not always what's needed first up. There's lots of opportunity to be making sure that you look at all of those different aspects together. And if you bringing the right group of people together to discuss what is needed and how it might be resolved, then certainly there can be advancement on all of those levels. It's back to the classic, people, the processes and the tools, but sometimes some really low-tech solutions can make the world of difference to helping people on their journey.
Okay, thanks. Andy, I think I saw you nodding in agreement there. It might just be my webcam. But I was just wondering, you spoke at the top about talking about upskilling and reskilling, and also what sounded like an influx of adult learners that you anticipate sort of swelling your cohort in the coming months and maybe years. How important is it to pick the right process based on that cohort? And as John said, not get hung up on just because a solution exists, you jump at the chance to use it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I was smiling. I've known John for a few years, and that approach in terms of people, processes, technology, and partners is something that underpins every service. I think universities tend to look at the world through their organisational structures rather than through putting themselves in the position of the student and how those structures and processes impact on the individual. So it's really important to take a step back and map that journey and how the handoffs occur, as John was outlining earlier on, how those handoffs occur between the various parts of the machine that make up a university, and that those parts are working in harmony and in harness. So technology is a great asset that can really help those different departments sort of have a longitudinal view of the experience of a student, and so that's the challenge, really, I think, is how you use technology to really underpin that student journey.
Yes, it's easier said than done, definitely. So, Cara, you mentioned about sort of some of the things you were focusing on, so increasing the opportunities for students to talk to employers and things like that. Is that an example of the sort of low-tech solution that maybe that John mentioned in his response?
I think it's definitely, yeah, I'd say it's low tech, but I think on a kind of personal level, it's quite important. Students, we had a lot of discussions about whether to do, completely non-tech fairs, the usual career fairs this year, and how to kind of convert those into possible virtual events. And, I've been on a number of kind of discussion groups with other university career services about how they're managing, and some of them are using these very big fancy kind of pieces of software where they can have avatars and they can have, stalls and, all the rest of it, which is fantastic. I think it was, we then had to look at our student body and think about what our students wanted to get out of those events. One thing that comes out of career fairs quite often is that students feel they haven't got they don't always feel like they've got a lot out of it. Sometimes they don't realise that there were certain companies there that were relevant to them. So we thought, okay, well, let's try and do it in a more in-person way, just using Teams, and let's try and have, panel discussions, Q&A opportunities, and kind of presentations, and drop-in sessions where students can just talk face-to-face with an employer for 15 minutes, and ask about their recruitment, ask them about, what kind of opportunities they think are out there, and just learning about that. I think terminology is really important. I kind of see bringing students and employers together as two people speaking a different language to some extent, and trying to increase that communication, I think is really vital. And I know from my own experience, and that's an really exciting thing about my role. I'm 23, I graduated in 2018. I have a good idea about the student mindset and how kind of the university pushed me through, and that's exciting to try and apply some of that knowledge to this role.
Okay, well, thank you for making me feel very old. I'll try and muddle through this stuff. Andy, I just wanted to, Cara's point about talking to employers and doing it in a more in-person way. The shift to online, I think, particularly with Ravensbourne being in London, you've got the locus of being in the middle of a technology hub, in the middle of a metropolitan hub, but now you also have the kind of flattening out effect where, with everything being digital, you can perhaps cast your net a lot further and offer students more opportunities and different opportunities. I mean, what have the pros and cons been of the past few months of being a London-based university that's increasing its online offering?
Yeah, good question. Certainly Ravensbourne does benefit from being part of that wider London sort of community and conurbation that where there are sort of large multinational organisations that are interested in education that we've been able to partner with. So that obviously has enabled, I suppose the digital change has enabled those relationships to continue, and we've been obviously continuing to meet with industry partners online over the last 6 months. I guess for Ravensbourne, the shift to digital is could be seen as an advantage because we're behind a screen of a sheet of glass. The outside audience doesn't really understand the scale of the organisation. So I think that provides an opportunity there for small specialists like Ravensbourne to really present themselves in a strong way in a digital capacity that perhaps where in the past that's been more difficult in terms of having such a small campus and a small physical footprint. So I think there are distinct advantages really. I think for smaller organisations to present themselves online in a strong way, and I think you're right. It's a bit of a leveler in that respect.
Okay. Actually, something to be optimistic about while we're all just about to get locked in our houses for another month.
Yeah, absolutely.
John, if I could come to you and just ask you again about sort of the big picture for this for universities, in that there must be a range of opportunities that exist now when, through the shift to online, when people talk about graduate employabilities. When we talk about talking with employers, we're essentially talking about a form of civic engagement, I think, because so much of it may depend on where you are in the country, and also, as Andy says, what type of university you are. Do you think there is overall, it's a positive outlook for higher education institutes as a whole? And what would be your advice for people who are now thinking, great, well, we've got this opportunity, as Andy says, we don't necessarily have to be constrained as to how we were working before March. How do universities get the most out of that opportunity going forwards?
So we would always be advocating bringing together a group of people in terms of basically saying, what is a future vision? And you need to understand from obviously the key stakeholders in that future vision, what is important to them. And I would say there is great opportunity for re-envisaging significant parts of what is on offer, what's available from universities. Now, that is not at all to say it's not complicated. These organizations are immensely complicated. I've worked within them, I fully understand them. There is a huge amount of complexity, and there is a huge amount of opportunity for reducing that complexity progressively over time, both for internal operations, but also for the experience, as we've already mentioned earlier. Both students and external collaborators, even if perhaps for research or many other activities, or indeed for staff members, their journey through the organisations and the benefits of time there. All of them are potentially areas which we would always be advocating for consideration, for just saying what is a re-envisioned future state for these things. Now, obviously, we have had the enforced change of delivery methods of teaching this last 6-7 months. Many organisations were already on a path to do that. There's been some great headlines about saying people have achieved 5 years of digital transformation in the last 3 months, I think, and that's been great. Nothing like a crisis to create great momentum. On the other hand, how about refocusing that, ideally not being in crisis mode, but how about refocusing that energy, as well as those learnings, as well as the benefits that have actually been drawn down from that, and just saying, okay, we've shown ourselves we can achieve things well, we can do things in good, timely manner, and also bring benefit where it is needed, or even just bring good service where it is needed. Across all organisations, we know there are areas which are either potentially in need of risk mitigation, or there's other areas which are in need of improvement in terms of overall efficiency or effectiveness, and then there's other ones which have opportunity for improving experience. There's potentially a big old list, and sometimes that can be really daunting. And I don't think anyone would envisage complete overhauls of higher education organisations in any rapid timescale. That said, there are many other alternative providers. There are many other alternative routes that people are progressively considering for advancing their education. And to our point of session now, being ready to be employed, getting the skills they need to be employed. So it does lend itself to, I would urge, focusing on what are those key things, what are those key groups of people that matter, that need to be given extra attention at this next point in time. And obviously that's so different for many different organisations across the sector. Some will have already just done a big push on student experience and invested lots of time and money in that. Perhaps others haven't had a chance to do it just recently. And again, perhaps others are dealing with legacy system solutions which just aren't working, and everyone takes far too long just to achieve a basic task internally. If people aren't achieving their tasks internally well, or in a fulfilled way, then they're not going to be serving other people very well. And obviously, reducing friction internally can benefit how people serve others really, really well.
Okay, thank you. Cara, I'd just like to come to you on this, because I think you have quite an interesting dual perspective as a recent graduate, but also somebody who works at an institution now. When you're taking on the feedback from students that you mentioned earlier, you're sort of planning holistically for how to maximize student engagement. What's the process then of sort of ordering your priorities, do you think? Is it a relatively simple process? Is it a case of looking at what feedback students are giving you and prioritizing that? But as John and Andy said, there's also a staff consideration in all of this, because taking on proceeding with the best will in the world to meet what you think is a student demand for something, presumably you also have to allocate some resource and some time to make sure that it's workable and make sure that your staff agree and can actually make it happen.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, Alistair. So this role is a brand new role at the University of Winchester. I've been in post for 3 months now. We were aware that we hadn't been pushing our, ourselves out into the kind of civic realm and engaging with employers as much as we should have been. And we were really keen to really boost our employability, and it came at a very good time to some extent. We launched things like our Student Advice for Life initiative just before COVID-19. We've seen a massive uptake from alumni who obviously graduated quite recently on that, and that's been a brilliant thing that we've been doing as a career service to support our graduates. You're right, you've got two things. You've got staff. It's brilliant coming into a team as a new member and seeing the kind of, especially technological solutions we have. So we have a kind of jobs platform that we were introduced to last September. But my employment has enabled my role to kind of take that platform on and find out exactly what we can do with it and how we can make best use of it. And that's been an interesting kind of opportunity for us to start developing how we're using technology to benefit students. So it's things like you say, just getting feedback. We hadn't had a way of getting decent student feedback from these events other than paper questions sheets and feedback sheets. So we're now able to do survey monkeys after an event. We're also able to ask questions when students sign up as well about what they're hoping to gain from the event and how they're feeling at this current moment about the job market and what are some of their concerns and what their current knowledge is of that industry or that company. So that's been really, really great. But we're kind of at the start of that journey at Winchester. And I think I'm very glad that I want to be student driven and student feedback driven with the events that we're running and seeing what works. But it also comes into play with hopefully being able to run events alongside student bodies. So we managed to do a law fair, which was run by the Law Society, and I just supported them in that. They were communicating with all the firms, they were getting all the students involved, they were sharing it on their social media channels. And I think that's a really important step to take as well, is that student staff kind of aligning and hopefully working together.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned the specialisation around subject areas, because it's certainly something that we've managed to do at THEs in the past 6 months, is really sort of drill down into who wants to talk about what and be able to serve different parts of our audience in that way. Today's event's a good example of that. We've had a question come in, and rather than wait to the end, I think I'll slot it in now just because it picks up on a point that John was making. So it was directed at John in the first instance, but I think everyone may want to say something about it. Jenny Button asks, says, John, it's interesting to talk about staff. How does the current situation influence talent management at universities, and especially opportunities for early career academics? How can universities support this group?
Thank you. I would say there's different models and different journeys for each of the different communities involved. I think it's important that, as Andy mentioned earlier, that there's experience mapping or looking at it as a community of people, and obviously you need to talk with that community of people and representations from there, and just say, what is it that they're encountering? And, a little bit to what Cara was referring to there as well. Unless you talk with people, and ideally in a relatively person-to-person sense, but also digital tools can help here as well, you won't know how they're currently experiencing things, but also through talking with them, invariably, they've probably got some really good suggestions as to how things might be improving. And if you can progressively look at the total end-to-end experience and the journey, things that are seeded and supported at an earlier stage in the journey can actually reap immense dividends throughout the whole journey and potentially further down the end without necessarily being immediately apparent in the first instance. So junior academics, yes, great example, perhaps relatively young in age, still needing general employability skills development, but also very specifically related to their role. And then also there's, depending on the type of organization, the type of faculty or academic discipline that they're working within, there will be many different common requirements and needs which would be beneficial for potentially many people, but also others which would be perhaps a bit more specific for their more niche community. And that's where the benefit of talking to wider groups of people can make the world of difference. Boiling the ocean is never a great idea, but notionally, if you're talking about what are the employability skills that are required for people as they move on from university as a student. That's one grouping, but there will be many common themes which are entirely valid for the junior academic joining any given university and starting their career within an 18 model.
Okay, great, thanks. And if I could come to you on this, I just wondered, this is a new challenge for universities, I suppose, that you now have the ability to segment your staff as well as your student body when you're looking at things, using data analytics or holistic planning for change management. It's something like the early career academic segment of Ravensbourne. Is that a large cohort? Is it something that you are making part of a greater plan for your staff? I mean, where does it fit into the whole at your institution?
I think in some ways the early career academics are this is a horrible generalization, but perhaps more digitally aware than the rest of us. So I guess there are a couple of things really that I've noticed. First of all is that I'm sure the future will mean that we have a much more flexible approach to working at home or flexible working, for instance. I don't think we've proven over the last sort of 6 to 9 months that we can run the organisation in a remote working fashion, and therefore, there will be much more flexibility, particularly for both professional services and academic staff alike. I think the other sort of aspect of this is that our academic staff are really wrestling with the challenge of online delivery right now, and that is absolutely putting a big strain on everybody, and really struggling with how to deliver a really authentic and great student experience. And so what we're looking at is really how we can perhaps relieve some of the workload. How can we support those academics more effectively? And that goes, it's not just early career academics, it's all of our academic staff, and particularly our teaching staff, about what are the elements of their role that we can support them with, whether that's learning design or whether it's some of the administrative sort of tasks that run alongside those sort of lecturing and teaching duties. So those are the kind of questions that I'm grappling with at the moment, really, is about supporting them across the board more effectively, and really working with them about how do we I guess seek to deliver those services to students in perhaps a different way.
Okay, great, thanks. We're tight for time, but I think we've got time just to squeeze in one more topic, which is about alumni engagement and how that's changing going forward, particularly with I think it speaks to the point that Andy made right at the top about people coming back into education and perhaps needing shorter courses and skills-based courses. This is something that in our editorial we're talking about a lot, and the way that the job market has a huge amount of uncertainty around it now, but also will do going forward for reasons that are nothing to do with the pandemic, just the way in which jobs are changing and new jobs are emerging over time. Cara, if I could come to you on this, because I think this is a question about the future perhaps rather than what you're doing right now, but what opportunities do you think exist for around sort of improving alumni relationships and engagement at universities, particularly with one eye on that lifelong learning and people perhaps coming back to learn with you at your institution later in life?
I think that alumni are a really helpful and useful tool when it comes to our students, but also presenting the university. I think that when it comes to kind of being able to come back and study, I completely agree that I think short courses are a really brilliant idea. I think they can fit in far better. You can begin to stack those qualifications. I think that a lot of universities are doing things like discounted master's qualifications and things like that. That's something that we do at Winchester, and it's wonderful being an alumni of Winchester and a staff member. There's some brilliant opportunities there for me, and we do a lot to kind of push further progression and further development of skills. I think it's also how we can support students beyond that as well, and how we can give students and our future alumni a bit more hope in where they can go and what they can do and achieve. We're looking at the moment at a lot of graduate opportunities that are graduate programs, run by larger corporations, and we're looking at how do we start to build that confidence. We've had one large corporation come to us and say, look, your students actually recruit really, really well. We want to be engaged with them and getting them in there. So it's like alumni, it's not just their stories, but also the data they create as well can be really helpful to institutions. And yeah, I think that's kind of
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Andy, is that in line with the similar process that you're going through at Ravensbourne when you're talking about engaging with employers?
Yeah, absolutely. And to echo Cara's point, I think we are obviously looking at all of the aspects how we engage with our alumni, and one eye is clearly on creating lifelong learning opportunities for those alumni in terms of perhaps stackable master's degrees or continuous professional development courses, and really, I guess, building that community as we go, but also inviting them back in to mentor our existing cohort to show them the opportunities that await them in industry.
Great, thank you very much. Well, that's us at time, I'm afraid. It's half an hour's flown by. Thank you all very much for your different inputs. I think it's been really useful to speak to experts from across academia and industry. You've had a variety of different experiences on this topic, and what's clear is that it's changing all the time, and it will continue to change in future. So I think it's a really interesting, exciting part of what universities do, and I wish you all well in your work, and thank you to everyone for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair, Andy, John and Cara. We now have a short break here, so please do go to the exhibition hall to see Domain7 Solutions and all our other partners' stands. But do join us back here in 30 minutes to hear from the President and Vice Chancellor of the University of British Columbia on how universities can combat the next mental health crisis. It's a very important conversation indeed. So see you shortly for that conversation. Thank you.